Hurts. And I know I'm going off about him, but I am a big fan, much like Adam, and I wish him well. Okay, that covers our reactions to Super Bowl 57. Again, make sure you follow us on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, and make sure you go to our website, buttfumblesports.com, to get all of our reactions to Super Bowl Sunday in case you missed anything we said, or you want to check out some more of our reactions or some of those bets that we did cash. We are going to turn the page now, and we're going to play a new game called History Hierarchy. Let me explain this for all of you guys playing. History Hierarchy is where I'm going to put out a player, and then we're going to compare him to some greats from the past and debate whether they are actually worthy of supplanting or replacing or surpassing that legend in all-time history. We'll start with, of course, Patrick Mahomes. Mahomes now 2 Super Bowls, 2 MVPs. No one has done that faster in their NFL career. In fact, there are only a handful of players who have ever done it. So now, Adam, I'm going to ask you first. We're going to play this game, History Hierarchy. Is Patrick Mahomes going to finish in history ahead of Dan Marino?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, Dan Marino threw a gazillion yards, as we know, with Duper and Mark Clayton at that wide receiving core. I think if Kansas City can keep this offense around him, keep this offensive line around him, I think he will surpass him for sure. And I think with 2 Super Bowls, like you said, 2 in the last 5 years, the runway is very long here still, as long as they can keep this core together. But I think right now with what Mahomes can do, running and being elusive and throwing the football and the plays that he makes, he's not just a pocket passer like Dan Marino was, right? Dan Marino wasn't very mobile, but was very accurate and lethal with his arm. I think Mahomes is just a little more talented with the way he can move and the offense that they can keep around him here. I think he's just so dynamic.
I agree with you. I'm going to give the edge to Mahomes. Marino is going to be lost to history, unfortunately. Marino's one of those guys who came around at a time where the league was still run-focused, and he changed the game. He is one of the most important quarterbacks in the evolution of the modern football game. However, I think Dan Marino is going to be one of those players who suffers because not only are all of his records now falling to not just second or third, but now fifth or sixth, or even farther down in the record books as offense becomes way more prevalent. But without a Super Bowl ring, that is the difference. So first round of history hierarchy, we're going to put Patrick Mahomes ahead of Dan Marino. The next player we're going to go for, Adam, is Patrick Mahomes ahead of John Elway?
Boy, that's an interesting one. John Elway took a long time to get to where he needed to get those last 2 Super Bowls to finish off his career, but put up a ton of stats in the meantime and carried that football team for a long time. Mahomes has, but the thing is Elway, even though he did carry that football team, there was a lot of talent around it as well. Boy.
Oh, no doubt. Shannon Sharp, Terrell Davis, they had good offensive linemen. Obviously, they had a good defense. Don't get me wrong. Elway was not the Lone Ranger on that team.
Yeah, and not even to mention the 3 amigos early on in his career too. So
That's right.
Yeah, so that's a hard one right now. I think, is he ahead of Elway right now? I'm going to say no, just because Elway's longevity and he finished off his career with those 2 Super Bowls. But I don't think it's going to take much. If Mahomes stays on his trajectory, it won't take much to pass him.
I brought up John Elway in this question because, again, much like Dan Marino, John Elway's brilliance and skill is going to be lost to history especially because Elway won late in his career. So people are going to remember the helicopter tackle. They're going to remember the Super Bowls in the 90s, but they're going to forget that this guy's arm talent was next level, that this guy had one of the biggest, most accurate arms in NFL history, that he went to a ton of Super Bowls before he won them. He just happened to always be the loser. But John Elway, from a career standpoint, should be ahead of Patrick Mahomes, but he's not. And the reason that he's not is because the early success that Mahomes has had, it took Elway literally a career to get there. He could not get over the hump and win those Super Bowls until the last 2 years of his career. And what Mahomes is going to accomplish from this point on, from this point in Mahomes' career to compared to Elway's entire career, they're almost equal. So now anything I get from Mahomes moving forward, I feel like that's the tipping point that ultimately gives him the edge in history. But I brought up these guys because it's tough. Dan Marino is one of the greatest passers of all time. John Elway, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. These are the challenges, but Patrick Mahomes, in cementing his legacy, continues to put these guys in his rearview mirror. The next one we're going to talk about, Adam, is someone I know you have strong opinions about. Is Patrick Mahomes in history ahead of Aaron Rodgers?
Yeah, if he's not ahead of him, he's equal. But it's hard to say he's not ahead of him with his 2 Super Bowls, right? Aaron Rodgers only won Super Bowl. If you would have told me back in 2010 when the Packers won that Super Bowl, I thought we would have been on the trajectory the Chiefs were on. The Packers were going to be in the NFC Championship game every single year. They go to the Super Bowl every other year. Rodgers would have got 2 or 3 by now, and that hasn't happened. Mahomes has done it. So, we can go back and look at some of Rodgers' stats in the big games, and they haven't been that great, especially in the second half when, the game was on the line. He's faltered in there. So I'm going to say Mahomes is past Rodgers right now because I think what he has done in a short amount of time with the 2 Super Bowls, but the 5 AFC Championship games, getting to 3 of them, these are the things Rodgers should have been doing with the Packers, and he didn't do it.
I completely agree with you. And I put Aaron Rodgers in this conversation as a bit of bait. I was hoping you'd take it, but unfortunately you didn't. You were smart enough to avoid it. But the truth of the matter is, you nailed it. Aaron Rodgers is what Patrick Mahomes could have been if Patrick Mahomes didn't fulfill the promise. And I hate saying that. But Aaron Rodgers has so much potential. And the fact that he only has 1 Super Bowl, not just win, but appearance. Patrick Mahomes hasn't had the teams. I would say Aaron Rodgers has had better teams around him at times and hasn't gone to Super Bowls. And Aaron Rodgers has all the talent in the world, but sometimes it's about leadership. Sometimes it's about execution in big plays, in big moments. I do think there's a level of coaching confidence that comes in. Andy Reid trusts Patrick Mahomes in ways that maybe LaFleur hasn't trusted Aaron Rodgers. I think back to that Bucs game in the playoffs. But the whole point is, Aaron Rodgers, I'm sure, is looking at Patrick Mahomes' career with a bit of jealousy. Now, I don't think he is because Aaron Rodgers is so damn enlightened that, he's so above jealousy. But the point being, I think Aaron Rodgers looks at what Patrick Mahomes is accomplishing, how he is being spoken of as the one guy who could track down Tom Brady. And I think Aaron Rodgers is in the back of his mind during his quiet silence, shut up, I'm an idiot retreat, is probably thinking to himself, that could have been me. That could have been me. And I think that history will think that as well. Aaron Rodgers had all of that ability, but he didn't deliver. Patrick Mahomes did. The last one we're going to talk about, at least for the quarterback position in this history hierarchy, first round of our game, is Patrick Mahomes. Is Patrick Mahomes ahead of Peyton Manning? Definitely the toughest one. Adam, what do you think in history right now? Is Patrick Mahomes ahead of Peyton Manning?
Well, I think this has a little bit of the Elway syndrome to it, where Manning, won these Super Bowls towards the back end of his career. I think that Manning, obviously, again, pocket passer, student of the game. You'll never out-prepare him. He will pick you apart because he knows what you're going to do before you do it, which is quite amazing. But as far as athlete-wise, in 2 Super Bowls this early, I think the edge is either to Mahomes or they're neck and neck with Mahomes surpassing him with the next couple of years. I mean, what Manning did for the game with his inability to move and just being a student and knowing, like I said, what you were going to do before you did it was just amazing. But as far as getting to this 2 Super Bowls, 3 Super Bowls, winning 2 this early in his career and keeping his core together, I think Mahomes will surpass Peyton.
I almost want to compare Peyton Manning to someone like a Derek Jeter, which is if you watch the sport in that player's era, you know how important they were, how significant they were, not just to that moment in time, but to like the history of the game. And yet, again, to your point, as history puts those guys in the past, you're going to show highlights of Peyton Manning, of course, but it doesn't do justice to there's 20 seconds on the clock, and he's going to use every last one of them to point out everything that the defense is doing before he actually snaps the ball so that his players, like a Madden game, are doing things to beat the defense on every single play, which makes him virtually unstoppable. It's hard to convey that in NFL films. It'll be hard for fans to pass down to other generations to be like, well, he outsmarted them. Well, people are going to be like, yeah, and Patrick Mahomes dominated them athletically. it's LeBron James versus like a Bob Cousy. Like Bob Cousy probably was really smart about how he, found lanes and found Bill Russell. But we're going to look back and go, man, that was so ancient because now we live in an age of like raw athleticism. And Patrick Mahomes is not like a Peyton Manning. That's what's interesting too. Patrick Mahomes is not someone who gets to the line of scrimmage and calls everything out. No, he just snaps the ball, and that dude is just making a play. He's using his leg and his arm, and he's doing wild things, but he's not outsmarting you before the play even starts. And that's what Peyton did. To me, Peyton is still ahead of Patrick Mahomes. And I know I'm probably in the minority group on this, but Peyton Manning, to me, is still one of the most important players in football history. I know Patrick Mahomes is getting there, but their accomplishments are similar enough. I know Mahomes has done it a lot sooner, but I'm going to keep Patrick Mahomes just behind Peyton Manning for now. It won't last very long, but I think Peyton Manning has earned that much with what he accomplished. Okay, we're going to move now. We're going to stay in history hierarchy, but we've got a couple other people to talk about. The next one we're going to talk about, Adam, is Andy Reid and his place in history. Okay, here we go, Adam. Is Andy Reid ahead in history of Mike Shanahan?
Wow, that's an interesting one there because Shanahan has had a lot of success over his career. But Andy Reid has been also a long staple success as well, too, with Philadelphia and obviously with Kansas City now. But I think with Andy Reid, I could be wrong. I have to pull up the numbers here. I think Andy Reid might have had a longer longevity of current success over time, where I think Shanahan was more of an ebb and flow situation. So I'm going to lean to Andy Reid on this one, thinking that he has a little bit more longevity of success with Philadelphia and then with Kansas City, especially going to Kansas City and taking that franchise from where they were and brought them to where they are now. I know Shanahan went to Denver and kind of did the same thing there as well, too, but I'd have to lean to Andy Reid here on this one.
I have to lean towards Andy Reid as well. What's interesting about this question, the reason I brought it up, obviously both have multiple Super Bowl championships, but also both have unbelievable coaching trees, people who have come out of their system and gone on to success. So really interesting how those two, I think, will be measured in history in a similar way in terms of accomplishments, not necessarily in demeanor. Okay, next one for us. Is Andy Reid in history ahead of Jimmy Johnson? What do you think, Adam?
Well, Jimmy Johnson obviously had a lot of success in Dallas there early on with that football team. But I think because Jimmy Johnson left and didn't do as well in Miami and had success in that one era with the team that he had, with Troy Aikman and Emmitt Smith and that offensive line and that defense and Michael Irvin, he had a team. I'm not so sure it was Jimmy Johnson or the players he had in that football team, where I think Andy Reid has done more of a building prospect to get to where he has in Philly and then obviously with Kansas City with the 2 Super Bowls. So I know Jimmy Johnson might be the glitz and the glamour with America's team back in the day, but I think if you look at everything as a whole, I think Andy Reid has done more with what he's had than given the team that Dallas had in the early 90s.
This is really hard for me. I love Jimmy Johnson. I love Jimmy Johnson. I got the opportunity to work at Fox Sports, and Jimmy Johnson became easily one of my favorite people on the planet. And everything about him just screams what you want in a head coach. That dude will chew you out, and at the same time, for some reason, you love him. And I understand that Andy Reid is not that guy. Andy Reid is the lovable cheeseburger eating guy, and I understand the two of them have had both. Again, I brought this up because both have 2 Super Bowl championships to their name. But I have to acknowledge that Jimmy Johnson burned out, and maybe it is because of his coaching style, but he just couldn't sustain it. Now, obviously, issues with Jerry Jones, but even in Miami, Jimmy Johnson he's like a meteor shooting across the sky. He is just so ferocious. He's so hot. He's so magnetic, and everything about him is incredible. But the longevity just isn't there. And the one thing we can say about Andy Reid, and you brought it up, Adam, is his time in Philadelphia put him in a special class. Going to 4 consecutive NFC championships with the Eagles was a remarkable accomplishment. He's now gone to 5 consecutive AFC championships. The combination of those two things, special category. Unfortunately, I have to agree that I would put Andy Reid ahead of Jimmy Johnson. Okay, here's our last one for this history hierarchy. Is Andy Reid in the history books ahead of Bill Parcells? Adam, what are your thoughts?
Again, that's another tough one. Bill Parcells obviously had success everywhere he went. He was a leader. He was a guy that ran the football team with no nonsense, right? You can't, let me make dinner if you don't let me buy the groceries type guy, right? I think that was like his famous saying he had there.
Famous line when he was with the Patriots. Yep.
Yep. So, he's had success everywhere he's gone. So that one's a tough one for me. A quick look up here of Andy Reid, which is completely impressive. Of 24 years in the NFL, 17 of the 24 years as a head coach, he's had over 10 wins with his football team, which is amazing. So, that's, we just talk about longevity and stuff like that. I'd have to look up Bill's numbers, but that's pretty impressive for Andy Reid right there. For 24 years in the league to have that many seasons where you've had over 10 wins is quite remarkable.
And then you think, look how far behind he is in Bill Belichick in the pursuit of Don Shula, which really speaks to how incredible it is to earn as many wins as Don Shula and Bill Belichick have. And to that point, Bill Parcells has the greatest coaching tree of all time because he does have Bill Belichick on there, Tom Coughlin, Sean Payton, and a handful of others. Right now, I still put Bill Parcells ahead of Andy Reid. That could be my lack of recency bias. That could be me kind of holding a candle for those 1980s, 1990s coaches. But Bill Parcells, I think he didn't have more success. To your point, the stats are going to favor Andy Reid. But I think Bill Parcells had a bigger impact on the NFL, funny enough, than Andy Reid. And I actually think that's why I have Bill Parcells ahead of him. I think Bill Parcells, there are some very famous lines we talk about, like, this is why you lift all them weights. This is why you do all that shit. And also, now no one can ever tell you that you couldn't do it because you did it. And there are certain NFL Films lines, or there are certain moments, or there are certain things about the Big Tuna that have restructured or redefined the NFL. And I don't think Andy Reid has done that. And one of the reasons I brought up the three coaches that I have is all of them have two Super Bowl wins. But Mike Shanahan, he did a lot for the NFL, but he didn't change it in the way I'm talking about Bill Parcells. And to that point about Jimmy Johnson did. It just didn't last as long as Bill Parcells. Bill Parcells from the mid 80s until the early 2000s had an impact on what the NFL was and what a good head coach was defined as. And I think for now, I do put Bill Parcells just slightly ahead of Andy Reid, though, as you mentioned the stats, I'm sure history will look towards Andy Reid's accomplishments and ultimately give him the favor. I'll give one more history hierarchy person. I'll throw that out there. Oh, Adam, what do you got for us before I do that?
Real quick to your point of the coaching tree, don't forget about that early 90s Packers under Mike Holmgren. They had Andy Reid, John Gruden, and Steve Mariucci on that staff. So that's a pretty good tree there too.
Unbelievable coaching tree. And when you look back, the connection Brett Favre has to those head coaches is really interesting. And it is its own 30 for 30. That won't be done anymore because Brett Favre is, persona non grata. Anyways, our last person that we're going to talk about in this history hierarchy is Travis Kelce. And this is the big one. Everyone's been talking about it since Super Bowl 57 ended. Adam, I'll start with you. In the history books, when we rank all-time tight ends, is Travis Kelce right now ahead of Rob Gronkowski?
Boy, that's another tough one here too, because I think both of these players have transformed the football game, right? When Gronkowski came to New England and Brady, just a monster, right? He's just as athletic as he is and the size that he is. He could change the game. And the same here with Kelce. The one thing with Kelce is he just does everything well. I think Kelce can block well. He can go in motion well. He runs quarterback sneaks. He always seems to be open. He makes a lot of tough catches. Where I think Gronk uses size and ability to kind of manipulate the defenders to his advantage, I think Kelce can pretty much do everything. He's a big physical size guy, but runs well. Like I mentioned, I think he does every facet of the game well, including blocking. So right now, I think with the Super Bowl win and the numbers he's been putting up lately, I think I'd give the edge to Kelce.
It's interesting you say it. First of all, I'll start with neither one of these guys was a first-round pick. And doesn't that tell you everything about the NFL draft and how we evaluate certain talent? I love Kyle Pitts. I think he's got a bunch of good years ahead of him. But Rob Gronkowski and Travis Kelce both were in first-round picks. And those two guys are going to go down as 1 and 2 all-time greatest tight ends, in my opinion. For now, I give the edge to Gronk, and this is why I do. I think Travis Kelce is the best receiving tight end of all time. I think he has passed Gronk, Shannon Sharp, Tony Gonzalez, Antonio Gates as the best receiving tight end of all time. But what makes the tight end position so critical is it's not just a receiving based position. Blocking is a critical component to that position. And to me, the fact that Travis Kelce is a good blocker, if you want to say great, I think that's a stretch. But Rob Gronkowski, to me, is one of the best blocking tight ends of all time. And the fact that Gronk was one of the best blocking tight ends of all time and one of the best receiving tight ends of all time, that's what tips it over the scales for me in favor of Gronk. Now, I do think Kelce he's got time on his side. He can build towards the argument while Gronk's career is now, it sounds like, officially definitely over. But Kelce is, at this point, one of the greatest receivers of all time. But in terms of tight end, is he better as a blocker than Gronk? No, he's not. And I don't think he will be. I just think he needs to continue to build accomplishments as a receiver to build that overall argument. Adam, is there any way I convinced you to change your mind, or are you going to stick with Kelce?
No, I mean, I can't argue with that as well. I just think that I just look at Kelce as more of a dynamic player, where Gronk was pretty much a physical brute force out there that would overpower you. Where I think Kelce can be more manipulative. You can put him in different spots and game plans across the middle, to the outside. He just does so many different things. So you're right. I think Gronkowski could be a better blocker. I guess what I'm saying is I think Kelce is just more of a dynamic player because he can do more things than what Gronk could.
I will say for all of those listening, if you ever have the opportunity to watch Rob Gronkowski film, that dude was a better runner than people ever knew. But what always impressed me about Gronk, those mitts, man. He could catch a pass that was like 2 inches above the ground, or it seemed like 3 feet above his head. His catch radius wasn't just remarkable. You felt like if his hand touched it, there was no way he wasn't going to catch it. And to me, I'm very biased towards Gronk. I'm sure that came out in that conversation. We're going to move now